The stars were calm above, but the cockpit was on fire inside. The human pilot, tired and half awake, slammed every button he could reach. "Come on, not now," he whispered, as red lights blinked across the screen. The ship shook again, hard, as if something huge had hit it from behind, then silence, followed by one long scream from the computer. "Critical failure. Prepare for crash landing." The pod broke through the clouds of an unknown planet. Trees taller than skyscrapers shot past his window. He pulled the emergency lever, and the safety shell wrapped around him like a metal coffin. Moments later, the ship slammed into the forest floor, crushing vines and snapping trees. Smoke rose from every corner. Then, nothing. He woke hours later to the sound of bugs clicking in the distance. His head ached, his suit was torn, and his wrist computer was cracked, but he was alive. He looked around and saw nothing but thick green jungle, glowing plants, and shadows that moved without sound. He grabbed his bag and limped outside the wreck. His boots sank into soft moss. The air was warm and wet, full of strange smells, sweet, bitter, sharp all at once. He took a few steps and stopped. There, in the mud, were footprints, not human ones. Each print was longer than his body, shaped like a mix of claws and toes, and fresh panic hit him. He wasn't alone. Something big had been here. Maybe still was. He turned back to the pod to grab a weapon, but the power cells were dead. All he had was a small survival knife and a broken flare gun. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the jungle. Something heavy had stepped on a branch not far away. The human froze, holding his breath. Then he saw her. She stepped through the trees like a goddess from a giant world. 10 times taller than any human, her skin pale silver under the light. Her hair was thick like vines, glowing slightly at the ends, eyes wide and shining like moons. She wasn't wearing much, just soft cloth around her chest and waist. In bone jewelry, she bent down, sniffing the ground near his footprints, then slowly turned her head, looking straight at him. He ran, heart pounding, crashing through bushes. But the jungle was her home, not his, every time he turned. She was closer, moving with silent grace. He fell into a small ravine, landing hard on his shoulder. Before he could move, a giant shadow fell over him. She was here. He looked up, expecting her to strike him down or eat him alive. Instead, she crouched, her face curious, not angry. She held something in her hand, glowing fruit, and offered it gently to him. The human didn't move, just stared. Why wasn't she attacking? What did she want? She spoke, her voice like thunder. Wrapped in silk, he didn't understand the words, but her tone was soft. She looked at his injured leg, then at his scared face. Then she reached out slowly, like asking for permission. He flinched but didn't pull away. Her huge hand touched his arm, warm and careful. Then she gently picked him up. Like a mother lifting a child, she carried him through the forest with ease. No growls, no chains, no threat. The human didn't know where they were going. But somehow he wasn't scared anymore. Not because she couldn't kill him, she clearly could, but because she didn't want to. Because still one question echoed in his mind. If she wasn't taking him for food, then why? The human woke slowly, surrounded by something soft and warm. At first, he thought he was in a dream. Then he opened his eyes. He lay inside a huge nest-like bed made of glowing feathers and moss. Everything around him was too big. Walls, shaped by nature, tall like cliffs. He turned his head and saw the giantess again. She was sitting near a fire, roasting something that sizzled and crackled. The smell was strange, but his stomach growled loudly. She turned and looked at him, eyes wide with interest. She didn't rush toward him, didn't roar or scream. Instead, she slowly stood and brought a large wooden bowl to him. Inside were slices of sweet-smelling fruit and meat. He flinched as she offered it, but she waited patiently. Finally, with shaky hands, he took a small piece, sniffed it, then bit. It was sweet and warm. He ate more, his hunger stronger than his fear. The giantess smiled. Showing teeth sharp but not threatening, she touched her own chest and said something in her language. Then she pointed at him, waiting. He guessed she was telling him her name, but he had no idea how to reply. So he just tapped his own chest and said, "Human." She tilted her head, confused, then nodded slowly. After he ate, she carefully touched his leg. Still wrapped in glowing bandages, she checked the wound, nodded in approval, then hummed a deep tone. It wasn't music, but it was calming. He didn't understand the words, but her voice soothed his panic. Hours passed. He tried to stand and walk, but his leg was still weak. The giantess gently helped him up with 2 fingers and pointed toward the cave entrance. Sunlight poured in, and beyond that jungle, endless and wild, he looked at her and made a small run for it. He didn't want to hurt her, but he needed to find other humans. But she was faster. She moved in a blink and blocked the entrance with her huge body. He backed away, afraid she would now show her anger. But instead she lowered her head, almost bowing. Then she sat down and looked away. Was she sad? He stared, unsure of what to do. No chains, no cage, just her big form keeping him here. She didn't force him, didn't grab him, just sat there, quiet and still. She looked less like a monster now, more like a lonely soul. He returned to the soft nest and sat down, confused. She walked over slowly, then set down more fruit and a water pouch made from some kind of leaf skin. Again, no threat, just care. That night, she placed a small glowing stone near his bed. It gave off warmth and light. Then she curled up across the cave like a sleeping mountain, her back to him, her breathing slow and steady. He stayed awake for hours, watching her. Her giant form rose and fell with each breath. And somewhere deep in his heart, a thought began to bloom. Maybe he wasn't her prisoner. Maybe he was her guest. But why treat a tiny outsider like this? What did she see in him? Why did her eyes always carry that hidden sadness when they looked at him? Morning came slowly, painted in gold through the cracks of the cave. The human opened his eyes to find the giantess already awake. She sat outside, bathed in light, humming a low song to the forest. It sounded like wind passing through hollow. Stones deep, slow, and peaceful. Her eyes were closed. Her hands cupped around a carved bowl of water. She wasn't a monster in that moment. She looked sacred. He limped toward her, unsure if she'd notice, but she did. Her ear twitched slightly, and she turned, smiling softly. She handed him a fruit like before, but this time waited for him to sit beside her. He hesitated, then slowly did they. Sat in silence, 2 souls from different worlds. The forest buzzed around them. Birds the size of dogs flew between trees. The air smelled sweet and clean. She spoke again, soft and slow, words he didn't know. But her tone was clear. She wasn't warning him, she was sharing something. The human pointed at himself again. Human, then pointed at her. Raising his brow, she seemed to understand and gently tapped her chest. "Luriel," she said. He repeated it slowly. "Luriel." She smiled and nodded fast, clapping her large hands together once. He laughed quietly. It was the first time he'd laughed since the crash. Later that day, she brought him outside. She moved gracefully, despite her size, like a predator that didn't need to rush. They came to a stream with clear blue water, and strange floating orbs drifting above it. She knelt and washed her hands, then gently poured water over his wounded leg. The pain faded, and the glow from the bandage faded too. He looked at her, amazed. Was she a healer as well as a hunter? Then he saw them. Her claws, long and curved, sharper than steel. They gleamed in the sunlight. The tips stained from old blood. He froze, remembering the giant footprints, the broken trees, the bones near the wreck. She noticed his fear, looked at her claws, and slowly pulled her hands away. Oh, she said something quietly and turned her face, ashamed. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind was full of images, her eyes, her claws, her silence. Was she pretending to be kind? Waiting for him to trust her? Or had he truly misunderstood everything? He stood and limped toward the cave entrance. The forest was glowing faintly, lights floating like fireflies. But before he could step outside, she was already there, blocking. The Wayne, not with anger, but with sadness again. She didn't move to stop him. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she crouched down and lowered her head to the dirt like she was admitting. He was shocked, this creature so powerful. Was showing weakness? She pressed her forehead to the earth, then looked up slowly. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from pain, but something deeper. Loneliness, maybe. Rejection, maybe worse. The human took a step back into the cave. Heart heavy, she watched. Him with eyes that held lifetimes of silence? She wasn't trying to trap him. She wasn't playing with him. She just didn't want to be alone. He returned to the nest and sat down, moments later. She quietly walked over and placed a glowing stone near him again. This time it pulsed slowly, blue light rising and falling like a heartbeat. She sat at the other side of the cave, far away. But her head turned just enough so he'd know she was watching over him. He looked at the stone, at her, and at the stars blinking above through the cracks in the cave ceiling. She could have hurt him, eaten him, crushed him, but all she had done was heal, feed, and stay close. And now, he wondered, something strange. Was he truly afraid of her? Or afraid of what he was starting to feel for her? Asterisk, the jungle was still, wrapped in morning mist like a dream. The human followed Luriel quietly, his limp almost gone now. She said nothing, but kept glancing back to make sure he was close. Today, she was taking him deeper into the forest too. Places even wilder than before. Her pace was slow, careful. Like she didn't want to scare him, yet her eyes held a strange mix of sadness and purpose. They reached a wall of stone covered in thick vines. Luriel brushed them aside, revealing carvings so old they looked melted by time. The symbols were huge, ancient, and pulsed faintly under sunlight. She placed her hand on the stone, and the carvings lit up with soft golden light. The human stepped forward, stunned. What were these things? Then the visions came. His head throbbed, and suddenly images flashed in his mind. Not his memories, but hers. He saw giants like her, laughing, singing, building massive temples under red skies. Then came the fire, ships from the sky raining. Metal and destruction. The giant people fought bravely, but one by one. They fell. The invaders were smaller, faster, crueler, and in the end, only she remained. The humans staggered back, heart racing. The images vanished as quickly as they came. He looked at Luriel. She had tears on her face, but stood tall. She touched her chest, and then pointed at the ruins, then pointed at herself. She was the last. He took a deep breath, trying to understand the weight of her loneliness for generations. She had wandered this jungle alone, waiting, hoping someone might come, not to save her, but to simply stay. She reached into a pouch tied to her waist and pulled out a small necklace. It was made of bone and crystal, glowing faintly. She held it out to him. He hesitated, then took it. The moment it touched his skin, it lit up bright blue. Another wave of memory rushed into his head, this time softer. He saw Luriel as a child, laughing with others. He saw her learning to heal, to sing, to protect. Then he saw her all alone, year after year, watching stars, waiting, building nests. She never used, leaving food for strangers who never came, until him. He opened his eyes, breath shaking. She was watching him closely. No words needed, he understood now. He wasn't here by accident. She believed he was sent, chosen. He touched the necklace and held it close to his heart. Luriel let out a long, soft hum, most a sigh of relief. She turned and walked ahead. And this time he followed without fear. They reached a clearing where giant stone statues stood half buried in the earth. Each one was a different giant, faces proud and kind. Luriel knelt and pressed her forehead against one of the stones. Then she looked at him and waved him closer. He stepped forward, his hand brushing the stone. It was warm, not just from the sun, but from something deeper. The same light glowed faintly from within it. Just like the necklace, she pointed at it, then him. Then crossed her arms over her chest in a gesture he hadn't seen before. Copied her slowly, and she smiled. It was a symbol, a promise. He had touched her past. Now she trusted him with her future, but deep down, the human knew this piece was fragile, He had seen enough to know those would come, and when they did, would they see her as he did, or as a monster from old stories? The air that day felt heavier, as if something important was about to happen. Luriel woke the human early, her voice humming low tones that vibrated the cave walls. She handed him strange folded cloth made of woven vines and soft feathers. He looked at her confused. She pointed to the clothing, then to herself. Already dressed in something ceremonial, markings were painted fresh glowing gold across her arms and cheeks. She looked radiant. He changed clothes slowly, still unsure what was happening. Luriel didn't explain, but her movements were calm and full of purpose. She took his hand gently and led him down a narrow path he hadn't seen before. The trees parted in two. A quiet grove surrounded by blue flowers and smooth glowing stones. In the center was a pool of clear water, still and perfect. Like a mirror, Luriel stepped in without hesitation, the water rising to her knees. She turned and looked at him, beckoning. With one hand, the human hesitated, then walked in carefully, the water warm around his legs. He stood across from her, the water shining between them. She began to sing not words, but deep sounds that echoed around the grove. Her fingers moved in patterns, brushing the surface of the water. She stepped forward, and with a soft cloth, wiped the mud from his cheeks, then dipped her finger into red liquid and gently drew lines down his forehead and chin. Her eyes never left his. He felt his heart beat faster, unsure what this meant to him. It looked like some sacred farewell. Maybe a blessing before death. Was she preparing him for some final act? He took a shaky step back, but she reached out and gently pressed her palm against his chest. Over his heart, the necklace she gave him glowed brightly again. The pool beneath them lit up, and the stones around the edge pulsed in a circle. She placed her other hand on her own chest, mirroring him, then leaned forward, whispering something so softly he almost didn't hear it. But the word felt like it carried weight, deep and ancient. Jerikai, suddenly he realized this wasn't a farewell. This was a bonding ritual, a joining, a union of two souls. He was standing in the middle of it, his face turned red. He backed away quickly. Splashing water everywhere, Luriel's smile faded, her hands dropped to her sides. She didn't chase him, didn't scold. She just stared at the glowing pool, her reflection now alone. He stood at the edge, heart pounding, brain racing. Had he insulted her? Was this some kind of marriage? Did she want him as a mate? He didn't know what to say. Luriel slowly stepped out of the water and turned away. The markings on her body faded dimly, like a ceremony unfinished. She walked back the way they came, slower than ever, and this time she didn't look back. That night she didn't hum. She didn't bring him food. She just sat far away, arms wrapped around her knees like a goddess made small by sadness. The human sat near the pool, the glow still pulsing. He looked at the water and whispered, "Jarakai." He didn't know what the word truly meant, but he knew how it felt. He felt like a fool. She wasn't trying to trick him. She was giving him something sacred, and all he did was run from it. He touched the necklace and sighed deeply. Maybe tomorrow he'd find a way to show her he understood, that he didn't fear her anymore, that he never truly did. The jungle was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that came after something broke. The human sat near the edge of the cave, watching the sky turn orange. Luriel hadn't spoken to him since the ritual. She stayed in the shadows near the trees. Every time he looked at her, she turned away. The warmth between them had vanished. She no longer brought him fruit or bandaged his leg. She didn't hum, didn't smile, and the fire between them was always cold now. He missed her. He missed her giant shadow nearby, her careful hands, her curious eyes. He missed the way she used to sit close, not too close, but close enough to feel safe. And now, she felt farther than the stars that night. He wore the necklace again. The glow returned the moment it touched his skin, and with it came more visions. This time, they weren't memories. They were feelings. He felt her heartache. He saw the way she had prepared the pool, how she had carved each stone herself. He saw how she had waited for years, not for rescue, but for connection. He felt her fear not of being hurt, but of being unwanted. And when he ran, it crushed her. His hands shook as the vision faded. He stood up, determined. He walked into the forest and followed the path she once showed him. His legs still ached, but he didn't care. He found her sitting near a glowing tree. Her back was against the trunk, her arms around her knees. She didn't look up when he arrived. He sat beside her, not saying anything, then slowly, carefully, placed the glowing necklace into her hand. She opened her eyes, surprised. He pressed her hand against her own heart, then pointed to his chest and said, in the softest voice he could, Jarakai. Her lips trembled. She didn't speak. But her giant hand reached for his face, cupping it gently. She leaned in, resting, her forehead against his, careful not to crush him. Her eyes closed, and her voice finally returned, not in words, but in hums that wrapped around his body like warmth. In that moment, he knew she never wanted to own him. She never wanted to hurt him. She wanted him to stay. To share something sacred, not food, not blood, not even safety, but soul. The next morning, she brought him new clothes, stitched by hand, his size. She lifted him onto her shoulder and walked across the valley. They stood together at the stone ruins, side by side. No fear, no confusion. She wasn't the predator he once feared. She was a survivor, a healer, a keeper of old dreams. And now, maybe she was something more, a partner, a protector, a mate. A new sun rose over the jungle, painting gold across the treetops. The humans stood beside Luriel at the edge of the cliffs. From here, the whole valley could be seen, rivers like silver veins, birds soaring freely, and below, the ruins of a lost people, once forgotten, now remembered. They had built a life together. One step at a time, she taught him to read the stones, to understand the carvings of her ancestors. He taught her human words, simple ones like friend, safe, and stay. She smiled every time he said her name correctly. He laughed whenever she tried to speak his, always adding an extra syllable, but neither of them minded. They hunted together, her tracking from above, him guiding from below. They built a shelter near the cliff, not just a nest, but a home. One wall held both their marks, her giant handprint and his small one. Side by side, every night, she would hum softly as he drifted to sleep. And every morning, he would place the glowing necklace near her cheek as a greeting, but peace never stays silent for long. One day, a loud hum echoed from the skies. Human ships had come. He saw the lights blinking through the clouds. He felt his heart twist with fear and hope at the same time. When the team arrived, they came with weapons ready, but stopped cold when they saw her. She didn't growl, didn't attack. She stood behind him, tall and calm, her hand resting protectively near his side. He stepped forward, raising both arms. She's not a threat, he said. She's the reason I'm still alive. The others stared in shock. They whispered about size, danger, unknown species, but he saw something else in their faces: wonder, confusion, and maybe even shame. Because what they saw wasn't a beast, it was a bond. They couldn't understand. The leader of the team lowered his weapon. We'll send word, he said. The planet will be marked safe. If you wish to stay, the human looked back at Luriel. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. He turned back and nodded. I'm already home, as the ship rose back into the sky. Leaving only wind behind, he walked to her, and she knelt down, arms open. He stepped into her embrace like one would enter a temple. Safe. Whole understood. They sat together under the stars, watching the night fall gently across the land. He once feared she would eat him, but she had done something far more powerful. She had held his heart and never let it go.